since I joined the department. This is what they are doing. So today's presenter is a son and also a very familiar face in the department. I would say that it probably does not need introduction because events like this, right, demand things like this, right, to introduce the speaker. So we cannot skip that. So I'll read a brief bio of the presenter. He completed his PhD in this department in 2012 and won the Vice Chancellor's Award for Best PhD in the Humanities category. So that tells you what you are going to get, right? He is currently a research fellow in the Language, Literature and Grammar section of the History of African Studies in our university. His research interests include nominalization of serial verbs, historical linguistics, second language migration, African language teaching and pedagogy, and indigenous African combatant in the linguistic traditions. The title of the presentation is what do typos tell us about what native speakers know or don't know about their language? And I can't pick case study of lexicalization and grammaticalization. So please join me in welcoming the presenter, Dr. Kambon. Kambon, you have 40 minutes to do the presentation, and then we'll have 20 minutes for questions.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so the title has changed slightly, but still the same content for the most part. So today we're going to deal with misspellings, typos, deviations, or innovations phrased in the form of a question. And again, a kind of case study on lexicalization, idiomaticity, and semantic opacity. So we'll come to exactly what all of that means, right? And here you see the back of a taxi. You see Idiomaticity. Idiomaticity is all written as one word, and then Tiasi is all written as one word as well. And we're honored my chief teacher is here from days of yore. So the abstract, you've seen the abstract, so we won't go over that, but for the most part that stayed the same. In terms of structure of the talk itself, I'll deal with the background of writing in general, definitional understandings of what we mean when we're saying misspellings, typos, deviations, or innovations. We'll also go into research questions, methodology limitations, research questions, data, and then findings and recommendations. Now, writing in general. Writing developed and it has several benefits in terms of allowing the writer to transcend space, in terms of sending messages, time, in terms of reading by subsequent generations, matter, in terms of words living on after physical death. A lot of good things come about from writing itself. And it has an interactional function as well as a transactional function. Interaction is talking about synchronic, what we're doing amongst each other in the moment. Diachronic is talking about across generations, across hundreds if not thousands of years. Now the background of writing, the earliest writing known to man is what is called medu-necher. For those who may not know, that's also coterminous with what they call hieroglyphics, right? So this is from Archaeology Magazine 1999, or sorry, Journal 1999. Bone and ivory tags, pottery vessels, and clay seal impressions bearing hieroglyphs unearthed at Abydos, 300 miles south of Cairo, have been dated to between 3400 and 3200 BCE, making them the oldest examples of Egyptian writing. These dates challenge the commonly held belief that early logographs, pictographic symbols representing a specific place, object, or quantity, first evolved into more complex phonetic symbols in Mesopotamia. So again, these are the earliest examples of writing. You can see Sarah, Tawi, the Sej, Nesut, so forth and so on. Also, for those who may not be aware, not only do we invent writing, but the other writing systems are ultimately derived from the ones that African people invented, specifically Greek and Latin. So you see the A sound in what they call Egyptian. Indigenously, it was called medu-necher, which translates to divine or sacred writings. So you see the A was originally an Egyptian vulture. You see how that looks in Greek, and then ultimately how it looks in Latin. The Ba here in medu-necher, you see it, and then you see what that looks like in Greek, and then ultimately in Latin, and so forth and so on. So a lot of research is there, so I won't belabor that point. But one thing I do want to go into is that as we also invented writing, we invented so-called typos or misspellings, in the sense that this is not a new phenomenon. According to Gardner, writing in 1957, late Egyptian, this is a latter stage of the language, right, was habitually and perhaps even willfully perverse in its methods of spelling. It says possibly the primary intention of the scribes was to substitute phonetic writings for the old historic ones. And this phonetic over semantic is going to be very important in our discussion. Unfortunately, the nature of the Egyptian script was such that phonetic orthography could often not be adopted without the suggestion of a false etymology. This writing, in fact, conceals the separate roots of the several words so written by representing only the phonetic similarities which chance to develop between them. So again, privileging of the sound over the semantics. Now let's bring it up to date. In Ghana Web, you find this going on even in the Akan language. So this is an author, his tree developed enough to become a national language, and he's lamenting how there are misspellings and mispronunciations, things such as Sunyane, right? He says originally it was Sonjai, but even here he's writing it with a ye because that's what it sounds like to his ears. Now if you write it with a ye, then that would give you a different etymology. You would think, well, perhaps it's yet to do, yet to be. And we even found this occurring in linguistic analysis. So amawa bayre no di yet. And the di yet is taking the yet sound at the end to be to do. Now, if you look at a bakum di or something like that, you would see very clearly that this is just the sound of the language as opposed to the word yet coming here. But again, when you have a semi-vowel, an E going to an A sound, E, it sounds like there's a Y there. So when you write it, you may put a Y there, but that would, again, perhaps point you in the wrong direction. Now, some of the ideas to do this type of research comes from working with my daughter. So we do homeschooling and also cyber schooling. So this is a conversation in Skype where she wrote BB, but she wrote it just like it sounds, B-I-B-I. Or B-E-B-E-B-B. And I told her it's not BB like that, it's BB. But this is how it would be written in the orthography, but it sounds nothing like that in Asante Chi. The R, the sound isn't pronounced. So you would think if you write it like this that you would say BB, which is how it actually is pronounced in Ekwakim, others. So, and I was telling her, Asante Toronto, and she's like, why? Says who? Basically, that's the question. Another example, she was writing this assignment, and from that, oh, let me zoom in. I forget we have people who, all right, so here she had written Nipa, and if you write it like that, you would think it's plural, but she's referring to singular, so I was telling her Nipa and then Nipa, right? But in terms of the sound, how different do they really sound to her, right? So for her, I'll write it this. I've seen it with two N's, so let me write it with two N's, right? And I'll zoom in for other slides too, because sometimes the text may be a bit small. Another inspiration for doing this topic was Prof. Nanaba Amfo, who sent her apologies that she won't be able to make it. She was asking, can we make linguistic sense of these inscriptions? And it was talking about in India, these are Hindi speakers presumably who are trying to write English, and you found that there are issues in their writing which you will see very clearly. And she was saying, if you think African soundboards are bad, you ain't seen nothing yet, talking about the India case. But again, these are non-native speakers, so get a cock with each biryani. Now, we would think you're talking about a cock in terms of a rooster, but if a native speaker would hear this, they may be thinking of a different type of cock that you would get with each biryani. So the men would say, I won't go into that restaurant, right? Or look at this, they're selling bed sheets. So this is what it sounds like to our ears, right? However, if you know that the semantics, even though it may sound similar to your ears, the semantics should be privileged so that you don't end up saying something that you really don't want to say. So you may think that this, after a long night's sleep, it has been soiled perhaps, we hope, by a baby, and we can go by the bed sheets that is there. This is also from India. Kitchen room, permission not allowed. Whatever that means, right? But again, these aren't native speakers, so you can forgive them to some degree. And here it looks like they tried to cross it out once, and then they replaced it with something that still didn't make very much sense. Permission not allowed. And even spelling of permission, we can see so much. Go slow, accident prone area. I think it's accident prone. But we would wonder what's going on in the background here if it's an accident prone area, right? And then the piece de resistance, you have pathological diagnostic, blood, stool, urine, semen, I don't know if that's spelled right. Pregnancy, I don't know if that's spelled right, but this is the kicker, etc. are tasted here. I think they're tested here, right? I think they're tested. But there's a problem if they are indeed tasted here. Oh, I didn't. Now, in terms of studies on typos, I looked, and most of the studies on misspellings, typos, they have to do with the reader's reaction to it. What type of reaction? And this came out last month, and it became very big, all types of news stories. And it says, if your house, and look at the spelling, is still available, send me an email. Personality influences reactions to written errors in email messages. So this your, that's not what we would expect in terms of the apostrophe coming in, but people would write it like this. But the whole study is, how do you react to that? Do you say, oh no, you don't know how to write, you are an idiot, you are a goof, whatever. It's just an email, right? So to what degree do we want to enforce the register in an email, right? And a lot of the news stories that came out from that were saying, if you correct people's emails, you're a jerk. That was basically the takeaway from that article. Now, in terms of literature review, again, most of the studies on typos tend to focus on reactions to them. The one that was just mentioned says who teaching and questioning the rules of grammar, phenomenology of error, and so forth and so on. But there was one that I found very helpful just in terms of definitional understandings that was able to give some degree of typology based on causation, what causes the errors. So I adopted it to some degree but added in a few additional points. So misspellings, right? Errors committed through ignorance of orthography. The person just doesn't know how it's quote unquote even supposed to be written, right, in the first place. So linguistic interference, perhaps I'm a non-native speaker of English or whatever the language is, and that would influence. Unspoken words, these are words that perhaps are used in a certain register, but they're not things that you hear every day. You'll see in a dictionary from 1800s, but how often do we even say that? So you're trying to produce it and there may be some issue there. This one I added in, lack of sufficient formal learning of the orthography, right? So the person isn't even really clear on what the quote-unquote rules are, how are they supposed to follow them. This one is again from the typology, from Typos Science, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Typos, errors committed for mechanical or psychological reasons. Perhaps you're typing and the oo is right beside the e sound, so you press the wrong one, right? I should enlarge that, thank you. Let's do that, right? So again, typos for mechanical or psychological reasons. You may just be thinking about one spelling, you're thinking there, as in the place, but just you're going through, you're tired, and you write T-H-E-I-R, like there, things, right? So that's something going on psychologically, perhaps you're sleepy or whatever. Mechanical typos stemming from limitations of a technical nature. Perhaps you don't have the keyboard installed to do an E and an R, so taking those into account. Now, this one is where it gets interesting, perhaps all of it is interesting, intentional deviations or innovations, right? Stylistic requirements. So if I'm supposed to be writing a novel about people speaking up in a village somewhere, then I wouldn't use a register of people who are in a formal business meeting, right? So these are the stylistic variations and how they would do it and how they would say it. You would try to be true to that. Also, desire to overcome limitations of a technical nature. This is another one that I added in. A desire to match spelling with the phonetics or audition. So the way I hear it, that's how I'm going to write it, right? And that may be related to the first point. We continue. So in terms of methodology, we're looking at, over the course of 6 months, I documented spellings of various words in Akan from L1 language users, right? And again, we're talking about are these native speakers. Often in linguistics, we're trying to get at what speakers know about the language. Well, we've been writing for 5,400 years, so perhaps as linguists, we need to take into account what native writers know about the language, right? So screenshots were taken of correspondence via emails, via mobile apps, forums. At a lag workshop, Dr. Akan was talking about how we can use all of this technology to our advantage in our research, and I had already started doing that, so I said, Dr. Akan, you are right on time, that's what we should be doing. They were anonymized to protect identity, you'll see how I did that. And I focused on two particular constructions, even though I got so much more data that over the course of time, I would like to interrogate. I focused on Medasi or Medawasi and Mipaocho. And I observed instances where they were written together and separately to try to discern patterns. Are people generally writing things together? Are they writing them separate? What type of linguistic significance may this perhaps have, right? Again, looking for evidence of semantic opacity. When I say that, I mean it's opaque. You can't really tell what the parts are, what are the meanings of the parts, where is one morpheme, where does it begin, where does the other one end? Perhaps, things of this nature, where the word boundaries, all of these come in, and semantics we're thinking may have an impact on this. If I don't know what the parts are, well, I'll just write the whole thing as one thing, right? Also, there was much more typo or variation data that will be analyzed, such as pronoun prefixes written separately or together with verbs. Now, again, continuing the methodology, the choice of Medasi and Mipaocho, that they occurred most frequently in the corpus, allowing for pattern recognition, right? So other things we may get a one-off occurrence, but these you found, very often. Also, they seem to be formulaic, pointing to possible semantic opacity and or lexicalization going on here. And the idea is that semantic opacity can lead to lexicalization reflected in speech and reflected in writing. So that's an idea. Now, the limitations of the study, perhaps not as scientific as I would like, but those who I correspond with more regularly, I have more data for. Again, this is just personal, not elicited. I'm just getting what comes to me. Also, in terms of those who I was corresponding with, seniors don't tend to use Mipaocho as often for juniors. So my senior people, they want to say, oh, Mipaocho, do this. They'll just say, oh, do this, small boy. And juniors tend to use Medasi and Medawasi a lot, even when they don't need to, because they're trying to ingratiate themselves to the almighty doctor, right? And it was non-elicited, more or less opportunistic research, sort of like lunar eclipse observation, right? You can't tell the moon, go stand there, Earth, you stand here. When it happens, that's when you can really observe the phenomenon, even though you can make predictions at other times. Now, just so we all have the same basis, existing orthographical standards, and I'll give you examples from various texts. The enseño, the apostrophe, is used to mark possession when the object begins with the letter A, and we found this in Brakun, which my illustrious P teacher, Mr. Pinton Saki, taught us. Medawanoasi, and saying, I thank your mouth, literally, or thanks for what you've said to me, right? So this apostrophe here is to mark the possession, wano. We'll come back to this. No is used in the language as the form to mark the third person singular object pronoun. And we found examples of that, and we'll come to that in our actual text. Nin is also third person, but is used to mark possessive pronouns with the in senho. Apostrophe is used as a possessive marker when the object begins with the letter A, right? So it's a very restricted usage, in the orthography. And examples of that are like wano, nasam, as opposed to nana, right? So this writing, the way you write it would imply a different type of constituency, right? So medano ase, it sounds when we pronounce as medanase, but to write it like this is letting you know that this da is getting, or rather the no is getting its form from the da, right? As opposed to if you wrote it like medamase, right? If you wrote it like that with the apostrophe, you're thinking this is possession going on here, or that's how it will be understood in the orthography. Or medanase, right? You're saying possessive of the base or underneath, or possessive of the in-law, right? That's how you would interpret it semantically in the standard orthography as it exists now, or we'll perhaps question some of that orthography. Now, in terms of the structure of both, they are actually somewhat similar, the Medawase and Mipaucho. The surface has something like a ditransitive type of structure, such as Mimanonsu, like a double object, where you have an agent, then of course the verb, then the theme, and the goal. And perhaps both of this Medawase and Mipaucho may actually be benefactive. And we'll come back to this point. We say benefactive. When I say Mipaucho, and again we'll look at the if this was possessive, we would expect a different tone. Mipaucho, we're saying I take off your hat, right? But that's not what it's saying. Literally, it's saying I take off my hat for you. But how many people even think about hats when they're saying Mipaucho? How many people, when they say Mipaucho, do they take off the hat that they're wearing? How many people, when they say Medase, do they actually get on the ground and prostrate in this day and age? Right? Very few, so it's more of an idiomatic meaning. Now in Ebonics, what we like to call African anti-American, you have similar structures where it's again benefactive. So get you some. Get some for your own self, for your own benefit. Or I'm going to get me some. I'm going to get some food for myself, right? The same type of benefactive type of construction, and it's much more prominent there in terms of being something that you can still create new ones all the time, whereas it seems to be frozen like an archaism in the Akan context. And this is something that we find some of these structures in the diaspora tend to be more conservative, whereas here in the on the continent we have things going on all the time. They may change or be influenced by other things. So we want to give a little bit of etymology, or at least a breakdown. The Meda, Aile, Wo, for you perhaps, benefactive, Ase, underneath, Medawase. Now look, the tones are all down on this. For Ase, we may think it would go from low to high, but again, this is just a formulaic thing that's been frozen in time, right? Perhaps. But it's idiomatic, I thank you. So when someone says Medawase, people don't literally prostrate, not prostate, prostrate when they thank someone, but perhaps at a previous time that was something that was done. We'll actually bring in some of that. Again, does this have a benefactive reading of I lay for your benefit, and then I say is telling you the relator now where I'm doing the laying, or do I do for your benefit? Do I lay on top of you? I don't know, right? Now we go to the source of all sources that everyone takes as an authoritative utterance on everything. I say that very tongue-in-cheek. This is Christall's 1933 dictionary. And he gives an interesting example where you get this non form coming after, where in the orthography you would think that this is telling you third person singular object, right? So, he thanks him or her for the tobacco. So it's letting you know that based on this orthography that the no is going here with the da. Right? Okay, let me bigify it for you. Anytime it may be a bit small, it's a very easy thing to correct. So, he thanks him or her for the tobacco, right? Then you have, Medawase, again, all low tone, right? Now, I don't know, and I'll ask you as we go along, is this something that speakers find weird? Is this something that you yourself would say? No. And we'll come back to this point. Is this just, what is Cristalla doing? Or what are his informants doing? Or have we changed our analysis, or what is productive for us, right? Any of these things are possible, but again, this is exploratory. And you find this also in the grammar, which is referenced here, Medano Ase. Now, you wouldn't say it like that, you'll say it like Medanase. But that pronunciation may also lend itself to a reanalysis, right? Where the no, if I'm saying Medanase, I'm not going to be thinking perhaps that it's the no form coming from the da, right? And again, he translates it as a benefactive type of thing, to, for, or in his or her behalf, right? I thank him. Benefactive reading. Now here that benefactive reading is much clearer when we say something like Mipo Cho, right? So pa to wipe, literally. Pa. So if I say pasun tuma or pahun tuma, whatever, I'm saying wipe in that type of movement. And then the wo is thought, if it's analogous, to be also a second person singular object, right? and then the cho is hat. I remove my hat for you for your benefit, right? So this one, it would be much more difficult to get this possessive type of reading, because you know I'm not saying I'm taking your hat off for you, because it's my hat that's coming off, right? So if we understand that this isn't possessive, then perhaps we can interpret that the other one may also not be possessive, even though the phonetics would lend itself to that type of possessive thing going on. And it's idiomatic. Excuse me, please. When you look at this picture, how many hats do you see? And even I had a colleague in African Studies who in his paper, he was saying something very interesting. He was saying that the colonial, the British, whatever, they brought in hat wearing. Before that, hats weren't worn amongst the Akan. And I found that to be very interesting, because there's an Anansi story about Anansi wearing a hat and putting the beans in, all these types of things. There's this type of thing. These are, you would think, very old, at least from the 1800s, these types of constructions. These we know, we know is actually older than that. But if all of this is enshrining hat wearing, to think that this is like a new thing, right? Just because now it's not as often, it lets you know perhaps it was something that was more common. But again, you see, none of these people would remove their hats when they say Mipaocho, because they're not even wearing hats to remove them, right? Again, a benefactor reading. And it's interesting to note the fossilized chow, even the variants of a kind like Asante that don't even pronounce the word in this way anymore. And all of this points to a fossilized archaic expression. So how do you say hat in Asante for any speakers here? Check. But how would you say something like excuse me or please? Would any of you say me power check? That's the point, right? So even this would let you know perhaps this type of, the more equipurian type of variation may be something that would be older, perhaps something different started happening in the Asante version. And also note that there's no constructional tone for these two similar constructions. Both are benefactive, perhaps, right? We'll leave the door open for that. But in one you have metawasi, low. In this one we have before cho, where the cho ends up going high. We continue. And again, we look to our authority of all authorities, tongue-in-cheek, not everyone thinks so. Cho, to take off hat in reference to someone, to beg submissively. Right, and again, it's saying that the cho is coming from hat. Now, how many people, when you say mi power cho, do you think of hats? One. That's interesting. How many of you, when you, two? Good. The more you think about it, the more you'll start thinking of hats. Right.
But coming from a big background, I have no difficulty at all linking.
Right. Me neither. This is what I think of anytime I say mi power cho. I know the etymology. Right. Exactly. And we're going to go into a little bit of the history of how long this concept of prostration and hat wearing, or let me say hat removal, goes in African society. So we're going to take you all the way back to 1352, right? Prostration and hat removal. This is Ibn Battuta. For those who may not know, this was a historian and traveler, traveled all around the world, ancient Mali, ancient Egypt, all these places. Or let me say traditional Egypt, not so much ancient. So ancient Mali, he says, of all people, the blacks debase themselves most in the presence of their king. For when any one of them is called upon to appear before him, he will immediately put off his usual clothing and put on a worn-out dress with a dirty cap. That's hat wearing first. Cap. Later he used a different term, but here we see cap. He will then enter the presence like a beggar, with his clothes lifted up to the middle of his legs. He will then beat the ground with both elbows and remain in the attitude of a person performing a prostration. When the Sultan, he's talking about the word mansa, as in Mansa Musa, right? But he's translating into Arabic. When the Sultan addresses one of them, he will take up the garment off his back, throw dust upon his head, and as long as the Sultan speaks, everyone present will remain with his turban or cap, as we mentioned before, taken off. So in this one passage, we get both prostration and we also get hat removal. And you can think about it as, you know, the significance of taking off your hat, is saying there's no barrier between what you're saying and me. And you can say, when you don't want to hear what a person is saying in the States, we'll do this. I'm putting up a physical barrier, and it's iconic, right? Iconic relation. The physical barrier is saying, I don't want to hear what you're saying. And it's thought that perhaps wearing the hat as the Sultan or Mansa is talking to you would also be like going to my head, right? So we can get some level of the cultural background of why do you even have to take off the hat. The prostration is much clearer. And we can also find in other African cultures the prostration is still done. So this is Yoruba culture. And they pride themselves on this is what we still do. This is what distinguishes us from others who may just curtsy or bow or do whatever. We get full down on the ground, right? You see all of them here at this wedding ceremony. Oh, power check. All right. Very interesting. We have some hats in there. So our research questions. Do idiomaticity and or semantic integration or semantic opacity lead to lexicalization reflected in the language or in writing? So that's our question. Do language users or write a chunk in their writing because they are not thinking in terms of disparate, transparent parts? So we'll look at some of this. I'll make this bigger for you. This is one speaker, and we'll go through several examples. In this case, me is separate from the da, is separate from the ase. The exact same speaker or writer, now they're writing the dase all together, separate from the me. Still the same writer writes it as the orthography you would expect, right? The midda is, separate from the ase. Still the same writer is now chunking everything. This was by far the most dominant form, where all of it are just one thing, midasi. But then the same writer has gone back to old habits where me is separate from the da, is separate from the ase. This lets you know what's going on, right? And then we come to cho. All is separate, and then there's an O here at the cho. We're going to abstract away from the mechanical error of perhaps not having, the keyboard to do the N sound. Now we have all separate still, but no O at the end. Because you're thinking that writing the O as mi pao cho, right? As I say it, that's how I'm going to write it. And the cho is going to have that O attached to it. Here we find, again, things are separate. Here we find that this is all one person, right? The mi pao is together, and then the cho, and we see the substitution of this mi san, the 3 for the X, right? Mi pao cho. And the O has come back again. Now this is what you would expect in the orthography, right? Mi pa written together, the wo separate, and then the cho separate. Here, all separate. Mi pa wo cho. Now we're on to another native writer, L1 writer. Mi is separate from the pao cho. Now the exact same person is letting you know perhaps they're not as clear on how it should be, because now the mi pao is together and the cho is separate. Now by far chunking everything together was more common. Of mi pao cho is all one thing now, for still the same writer. Now we come here to what we would expect for a possessive construction, midawasi, or perhaps midawasi. But the tones don't lend themselves to either one of those types of possessive interpretations. But that's what the phonetics tell you, midawasi. No one says midawasi, right? So the elision is having an impact on how it's being written, perhaps. This is by far again the most common one, midawasi, all one thing, right? Continue. This one, midawasi. Right? We lost one of the A's in there, right? So is it da? Is it ase? Are there two A's? Is there one A? We're not quite sure. Now the next speaker, again, it was most common to do everything as one big chunk. Nipawacho is just one thing. So this person perhaps isn't thinking that hat is something in there, just like the show of hands here, right? When I say Nipawacho, I'm not thinking about my hat. Another writer wrote everything separate in terms of midawasi. Mi, da, wo, ase. Of course, you wouldn't say it like that, but that's how the speaker. Now look at this. This is interesting. Mi, da, different from the sit. What does that say? Midase. I don't know what Midase said. But if you write it like this, perhaps you would interpret as the person's name is Mida, right? Again, the way it's written is in the orthography is to get you some semantic meaning off the bat, whether or not you're a native speaker or not. This one was very interesting. Again, the me is separate from the da, is separate from the se. This one was one of the aberrations. Me, and then pa apostrophe u, and then acho. Right? Hard to know what to make of this, but perhaps some of you have some ideas of what's going on here. Right? But the person is thinking perhaps she uses apostrophe, so let me be exotic and show that I know, yeah, right? Now we have Mida. That's it. Perhaps this is a glottal stop, I'm not quite sure. That's it. Now this was very interesting to me. This is someone who's Asante, both mother side, father side, but using Ga orthography for me called Cho, right? Very interesting. And did this on a couple of occasions. Now the wool has gone, but me pa Cho, right? So what do we make of all this? Or let's summarize these findings. In general, you find that those who wrote everything together tended to dominate those who didn't, right? So you can add up all of these together and see that tends to dominate. We're just going to chunk everything into one thing, right? And in this, from 50 L1 users of the language, we got 18 different variations, right? Including even the same person giving 10 different variations, right? So that's interesting. If I'm asking all of you to write me Paul Cho, I may get, how many people are here, 40 different responses. Even more interesting was Midase. Now this is how you would expect it in the orthography, either with or without the wolf. But look, all of these people are using Midase, all one word. Right? Is it right? Is it wrong? I don't know whether we call it that, but even that we can add just the Midase with one I, or any other case where everything is written together. Right? So the people are definitely doing some chunking here. 25 variations. Before I started the study, I was saying just off the cuff, if you ask 10 people to write Midase, you'll get 10 Midases. No, it's even more than that, 25 different variations of Midase. Now we'll come into the theoretical framework for this. We're looking at what's going on here. Is the person knowledgeable of the orthography, or do they lack the knowledge of the orthography? Is there a resistance to this established orthography or acquiescence to it? Is there intentionality or unintentionality? Is there importance? I need to learn how to write it, or it's not even important. I'm just trying to get my message across, right? In addition to these main ones, you can look at opacity and transparency. Do I know the meaning and the breakdown, the etymology? How many people do? Do I use it often or lack of use? Is there social influence, familiarity, institutionalization, colloquiality? Of these go together, they should be separate. Compositionality, flexibility, and these come to idiomaticity. Now to look at these different binaries, and usually I don't use binaries, so some of you are like, oh, this continuum guy is talking about binary. Why? Because sometimes as African people we do use binary, right? In terms of divination, whether it's cowrie shells, or opalefa, or merendilogun, amongst the Yoruba, that all of these, and African people indeed invented binary. I don't know if I have time to go through this, but this is Ron Eglash talking about the African origin of binary code.
Example of an algorithmic approach to fractals that I found was actually not in geometry. It was in a symbolic code. And this was Bamana sand divination. And the same divination system is found all over Africa. You can find on the East Coast as well as the West Coast. And often the symbols are very well preserved. So each of these symbols has 4 bits. It's a 4-bit binary word. You draw these lines in the sand randomly. And then you count off, and if it's an odd number, you put down 1 stroke, and if it's an even number, you put down 2 stroke. And they did this very rapidly, and I couldn't understand where they were getting, they only did the randomness 4 times. I couldn't understand where they were getting the other 12 symbols. And they wouldn't tell me. They said, no, I can't tell you about this. I said, well, look, I'll pay you. You can be my teacher, and I'll come each day and pay you. I said, it's not a matter of money. This is a religious matter. And finally, out of desperation, I said, well, let me explain George Cantor in 1877. And I started explaining, why I was there. in Africa, and they got very excited when they saw the Cantor set. And one of them said, come here, I think I can help you out here. And so he took me through the initiation ritual for a Bamana priest. And of course, I was only interested in the math, so the whole time he kept shaking his head going, I didn't learn it this way. But I had to sleep with a kola nut next to my bed, buried in sand, and give 7 coins to 7 lepers, and so on. And finally, he revealed the truth of the matter. And it turns out it's a pseudo-random number generator. They're using deterministic chaos. When you have a 4-bit symbol, you then put it together with another one sideways. So even plus odd gives you odd. Odd plus even gives you odd. Even plus even gives you even. Odd plus odd gives you even. It's addition modulo 2, just like in the parity bit check on your computer. And then you take this symbol and you put it back in, so it's a self-generating diversity of symbols. They're truly using a kind of deterministic chaos in doing this. Now, because it's a binary code, you can actually implement this in hardware. What a fantastic teaching tool that should be in African engineering schools. And the most interesting thing I found out about it was historical. In the 12th century, Hugo of Santillana brought it from Islamic mystics into Spain. And there it entered into the alchemy community as geomancy, the divination through the earth. This is a geomantic chart drawn by for King Richard II in 1390. Leibniz, the German mathematician, talked about geomancy in his dissertation called De Combinatoria. And he said, well, instead of using 1 stroke and 2 strokes, let's use a 1 and a 0. And we can count by powers of 2, right? 1s and 0s, the binary code. George Boole took Leibniz's binary code and created Boolean algebra, and John von Neumann took Boolean algebra and created the digital computer. So all these little PDAs and laptops, every digital circuit in the world, started in Africa. And I know Brian Eno says there's not enough African in computers, but I don't think there's enough African history in Brian Eno.
We can also use binary as a theoretical framework because we invented that. We also invented ideas of continua, complementary opposites, and so forth and so on. So we don't want to argue against binary by using binary. Well, binary is European and we're African, so we can't use binary. No, you're using binary to argue against binary, right? As opposed to more African when and where. And African people have actually invented the PC. I'm not sure how many people knew that, but this is Dr. Mark Dean, who has 3 of the 9 patents on the original PC. You have Africans like McHenry, who co-founded Network Solutions and became the manager of the domain name system. Every .com, .net, .everything came through that. Prof. Ninoku Kweno right here in Ghana inducted into Internet Hall of Fame. So we've been doing digital for quite some time. And in this, we can look at different combinations, just like how you throw cowrie shells and get different combinations. Resistance plus knowledge plus intentionality plus importance. Those are rebels who say, I'm not going to go with the thing, right? Others who acquiesce because they don't know it, unintentionally unimportant. Those are foreigners. It doesn't even matter. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter to me. Others who acquiesce knowledgeably, intentionally, because it's important. You can say those are followers, right? And even just on the knowledge itself, they're harmonizing or conflicting knowledges. I have orthographic knowledge, but I also have phonetic knowledge. Which one am I going to privilege? It's sort of like ophthalmology theory, right? Semantic knowledge, morphological knowledge, syntactic knowledge. Which one is most important to me in this message that I'm going to send, right? And it's even analogous to DNA, right? Where you have knowledge, lack of knowledge. You have importance, lack of importance. So there are certain genes that are switched on and off, right? And this is exactly what the and we want to get away from what we're calling negritude scholarship. L'émotion est nègre, comme la raison hellène. Emotion is Negro as reason is Greek. That's a very binary opposite type of thing, but what's the substantiation for it? If we're African, we have to just be emotional. We can't use logic or reason. We have so many proverbs that contradict that type of thing. And I'll start rounding up. So this is orthographical variation studies in linguistics. Now this is usually relegated to philology, but it may have import for modern studies of linguistics in terms of what speakers or writers know about their language. Perhaps lack of understanding of orthography, spelling, and grammatical representation rules, what native speakers don't know or do know. Also language attitudes. People say, I don't even care to know how to write it. I'm just doing my thing. I just need to send this text message. But it's not only in Akan. We find numerous examples in English. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, a lot, apart, right? So even as I was trying to do the slide, I wrote a lot together and it corrected it automatically. I said, no, I'm trying to write a typo here. Could have, people say could have or would have. This can even be shortened to aclitic, could have, would have, right? So what we find is writing influences speech and vice versa. So people can say quote unquote. So they're saying what they would write down, or saying full stop or period. Well, that's a big question mark, hashtag, seeing dollar signs. So after 5,400 years, linguists need to account for what native writers know about their language, and also bring in this concept of native writers. But here, this is Prof. Asada Opoku lamenting how people don't even know how to say their own names anymore. They'll say Lamte and Mensa instead of Mensa, instead of Lante, and so forth and so on.
We don't even know how to pronounce our names. We all mispronounce our names in Ghana. We call ourselves Mensa. There's no Mensa, it's Mensa. We say Lamte. There's no Lamte in Ghana, it's Lante. You see, well, Asante, and so on and so forth. When the Europeans mispronounced our names, we came to believe, surprisingly, that that was the better way or the correct way of pronouncing our names. But who mispronounces their name?
Do you find examples even when we say Accra, right, coming from Ukraine, and so forth and so on? So findings, writing could perhaps be an externalized representation of internalized information, right? We can start to see patterns here. Also, the writing system is capturing knowledge or lack of knowledge. And there's an implicit prediction in this that the wide variations in spelling may be due to semantic opacity, right? I don't really know what the different parts are, so that's why we get so many different variations. Just different thoughts that we, generally as linguists, we talk about what is Akan doing, what is Yoruba doing, and it's assuming that everyone who is an Akan writer or speaker is operating with the same ideas, you know, in terms of their linguistic generation of these things. And also, do we privilege one over the other? Do we privilege semantic content or phonetic accuracy, or both, or neither? If it's audition who's, because you can have 25 different people hearing quote-unquote different things, and how different things are kwaba, you know, that would obfuscate akọ and aba, right? But in other cases, the standard asante safwa, it obfuscates safe plus wa, but you can get this if you know the equipem is safe, right? So we can't just say, well, let's use the standard orthography to get semantics, because sometimes even that would hide that. Further thoughts, native speakers may know the rules or laws, but just like any rule or law, we can say I'm breaking that law, or that law doesn't apply to me, right? Or what I'm doing. Also, language is a whole, a system, but how much do people know that whole and that system? So future directions in terms of recommendations, I would recommend the development of a mobile app with upvoting for orthography and technical terms, because we have so many dictionaries, but most people, some of my colleagues don't even know there's any dictionary for Akan. They say, oh, I'm a native Akan speaker, I speak it very well. They say, oh, do you know this word in this dictionary? They say, Akan has a dictionary? Something like a gloss bee, for those who are familiar with that website, that type of setup, but with voting input from all people to make it quote-unquote democratic. Another way to go is Adinkra alphabet. This is something that was proposed using Adinkra, where Adinkra Hene is the A, Bin Kambi is the B, and so forth and so on. And someone on my site, Abibi Tumikasa, actually used that to write Abibi Tumikasa, the Adinkra alphabet, Abibi Fahudi, both of these are neologisms, African liberation, using this Adinkra alphabet. So finally, food for thoughts. When we think about errors, right? That's one way to think about it. Or we could think about it like this. Right? So sometimes as I was looking at the data, I felt like I was a lifeguard at a swimming pool, and I'm seeing people flailing, they're not sure what to do, and I'm letting them drown to get my data. How is this person going to flail the arms as they're drowning? But again, these are final parting thoughts. These are the references. Thank you for that additional time.
He's given us a lot to think about, you know, and also if they describe us as being emotional, we can tell them behind that is what reason.
Yeah.
right?
There's a reason for it.
Yeah.
He's an African.
Yeah.
That's Senghor.
Because
Yeah, that's Senghor. He's an
even
African.
the
Yeah.
dance and all these things, the
Yeah.
steps and all these things, right? There's a reason.
Yeah. The sad part about that is that that's the first president of Senegal, Leopold Sédar Senghor, who's saying that like we should embrace our emotionalism. That's all we can do. That leave reason to the Greeks, and it's like
There's a claim that he was an African after all.
it wasn't.
Yeah, so
Perhaps on the outside, but perhaps something else was on the inside.
yeah. Okay, so there's time for your questions, your comments, questions. Yeah.
Just a quick question, but before then, I just want to suggest rereading Senghor. So there have been a lot of debate on that particular phrase.
Yeah.
And in philosophy, some people think that emotion for the African includes reason. So Senghor wasn't necessarily trying to bring a dichotomy. So
Yeah.
the African privilege is emotion. It doesn't mean that we tend to exclude reason from it. So just by the way. But I kept wondering, so when I'm writing in Word, Microsoft Word, I write without apostrophe.
Yeah.
I write it all. But when I'm on the phone, chatting, to bring it apostrophe is just too hard to do. So I just write it all without bringing it apostrophe. But I just write it in full without any spaces and all that. So don't you think all these things is the context of writing in which you're looking at people texting or writing, and because they want to be fast enough and let the conversation flow and all that, it might not necessarily tell us anything about their knowledge of the orthography. They just want to, and they presume you would understand what they mean, even when they don't bring it apostrophe, they write it correctly, you would know. So what's the point in bringing apostrophe and trying to make it too cumbersome for them? So I don't know if maybe the research can also look at when people actually write, say Microsoft Word, formal letters or whatever, what are they making all these variations for one particular native speaker?
Okay. Should I?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So in terms of Senghor, that's a direct quote from him. Reason is Negro. Emotion is Negro. Reason is Greek. So some try to redeem Senghor for that, but it seems to be very clear, and that tended to be the thrust of the Negro 2 movement. M. Césaire, so many others who were saying we need to embrace our Africanness. Let's let them be European, but just their concept of what was included in the Africanness seemed to be very limiting and seemed to take a priori assumptions that Europeans had made, and let's just embrace what the Europeans have said about us and just live that to the fullest extent. That's one. In terms of the apostrophe, you said that when you're writing in Microsoft Word, you do the apostrophe, right? Correctly. Now, in the orthography, there shouldn't be any apostrophe, right? In the standard orthography, it will be mid-dot. Wo would be written out, and then ase. So even our understanding of what we know, how it should be written or how it shouldn't be written is that should in quotes. That's my air quotes as I write it, right?
But that also, explains what I'm trying to bring in the two, brackets, bring in the word. It's just too cumbersome if you just type in or text it. And
so what you've brought up is actually a couple of points. One is importance, and that's accounted for. To what degree does a person in whatever context even see the thing as important? If I'm texting, it's not that important. If I'm writing a paper, maybe it is. It also brings up the other factors in terms of knowledge or lack of knowledge. Do we even know that there, quote unquote, should not be an apostrophe in this? That the wo is interpreted as the object of the dot, benefactive, just like how it's the object of the wo, in mi pao chow, right? Mi pao wo, for your benefit, chow. So these are two of the factors that we're actually accounting for: importance and lack of importance in a particular situation, knowledge and lack of knowledge. And in terms of lack of knowledge, do we even know when or where the orthography even prescribes it? But then, whether or not it prescribes it, do we say, let's acquiesce to that? Do we resist that? Intentionality, unintentionality. So all of these factors are actually incorporated in this type of framework that we're introducing.
So exciting as always. For me, it's in the minds of a speaker who is trying to reconstruct something that's already semantically opaque.
Right.
this is really, really difficult. Because if you look at that construction, that one construction, it can have like 3 or 4 different meanings depending on the way that you write it. And actually, the same writing could mean several things. So maybe reconstruction in the end tells us partial knowledge of some sort on the part of the speaker, because you have exactly the same construction like Odamefem. Now, Odamefem doesn't mean, it means that he is laughing at me. And it has exactly the same structure. And fem and ase refer to exactly the same thing. This is ground. And yet, the medawase or odamase means he thanks me. And odamifo means he's laughing at me. And we never write odamifo, alright, as we would odamase or medase. Odamifo, medase. Alright? So frequency of use here also may have contributed to the fact that now people don't see, they can't really see the different parts because of the level of idiomaticity that it has reached. Also, in terms of the syntax, maybe that construction is one evidence that the benefactive construction actually began as a simple gift construction. Because in Odame form, this is not possessive. The form there is not referring to the object. It's not. And also gives evidence that these related nouns are actually nouns or started nouns.
Okay. Yeah. So these are interesting points in the Odame form. Do you interpret that to be benefactive or causative?
It's benefactive, really.
Right.
That so
the person is laughing at me for my benefit.
No, not for your benefit. Not for your benefit, because the benefactive construction or benefactive meaning could easily have a malefactive meaning as well, right? But is that idea that whatever I'm doing is because of you, whether that's to your benefit or to whatever, that's entirely different, right? But it's that same source construction that needed to be disambiguated from a case of prototypical gift or physical transfer.
Yeah. It seems like we have 2 different paths in terms of the idiom, right? So on the surface they look similar for the structure,
right.
So the medawase, but now that's taken on its own idiomatic meaning. Or I don't think either one of those would be taken to be a literal, meaning who is going down to the ground, who is laying, on the ground. So, just in terms of the structure, one thing of that type of structure, it makes me think that this is something that is an archaic type of thing. It's not as productive now to do a benefactive type of thing. It's similar, however, to the give construction, as you point out. So whether or not all of these came from the give, or the give is one manifestation of what used to be a much more productive way of structuring the language, I think that something that came up when we were speaking about it before is that now speakers are thinking odamase or medanase as the is collocating with the ase, and that's possessive, right? That would give you a different type of tonal reading, but it's letting you know there's some type of reanalysis perhaps going on. This is the structure that used to be very productive, but because we don't produce that type of structure anymore, now we're going to make sense of it with a type of structure that we would, produce. So it's a lot to think about. This is still exploratory, but, I think a lot can be teased out in terms of the structure, the idiomaticity, the level of idiomaticity, and what's going on in the speaker in a particular context in terms of knowledge, lack of knowledge, acquiescence versus resistance, all these types of factors.
Don't forget generative grammar when you are doing it. When the word sense are represented, I think that is ambiguity.
Yeah. Or we would think that they should disambiguate, but for the speakers, we're asking, if it's the same speaker who's writing medase all these different ways, for this person it may just be one thing, But for us trying to analyze it, we would get different things. This, you're writing it like this is possessive here, right? So I would try to interpret it as this is possessive, but for you, you're just writing the email message and 10 different ways of writing Medasi, right? So there should be implications semantically, syntactically, based on how you write it, but we're asking, do native speakers really identify with the implications of me writing it this way versus that way?
Yeah, that's for that. Yeah, very interesting. The data is from WhatsApp.
Some WhatsApp, some emails, some forums, so various types of, correspondences, but all digital. Everything is digital.
Have you been able to sort them out so that we know which ones are from the WhatsApp platform and which ones are from email and so on? Because there are studies in chat room conversations, and it is clear, not exactly in this type of but it is clear that there is a mapping of orality. I mean, when we want to talk, conversation, and they're using WhatsApp. They want to keep as close to like talking, so speak to that kind of phenomenon. Similar to what the gentleman first so people are like talking, but you have to write. So we see some kind of influence on speech, on their writing. But if you come to, so we expect that in WhatsApp chat, that is going to have. So people merge the whole world, they just quickly want to say what they, but if they are writing in on email platform, and the person will not respond quickly, there's no urgency to just keep the conversation flow. So I would want to see the variation
based on platform.
Platform. To see whether some of these separations and fusing the code will not just so we find the influence of speech context, for example. I also mentioned that people may want to feel, chanting based on what they desire to write, the way they will speak. I have found myself facing that challenge when I transcribe conversations, post-meeting conversations. So you write what you hear, or do you write it as the orthography dictates? So you see the VCR, that is the child, or the VR, this is what the person said. So I have also gone for what I've heard. So you find in my writing, what you call it, data that is there, what you have heard. And then you try to separate. Sometimes you say that there are two morphemes in there, you show that the two morphemes are fusing, and so on and so on. You are aware of the orthography.
Yeah.
So people like me, when I'm writing, they be in the chat room or WhatsApp platform, I'll write the way I will speak. And I'm sure the psychology is there for other writers as well.
So I didn't separate the data based on the platform, but I think that's a very good suggestion. One thing that I saw just going back through it, as you were saying that, is that I'm finding the separation in emails. I'm also finding the togetherness in emails. I'm finding the separation on the WhatsApp ones, the smaller, and also, so there may be a correlation that's definitely worth checking out, but just from going through it cursorily, I'm seeing on both people are separating it, on both people are chunking it, on both. Now in terms of like the Medasi, out of the 50 speakers, we had 60 occurrences. Sometimes the person will produce it more than once. 60 occurrences of all the Medasis are together. And that's, I can tell you right off the bat, it's irrespective of the platform. So I think that's something to definitely take into account to show that, yeah, I've looked at that, and now we can say something definitive on that. But from just looking at, the data, it doesn't seem to be a correlation here. Yes.
Yeah, and also to add to what you said, you may want to increase the variable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that it's not just Midasi.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that will help a lot to actually help us understand which platform has all these groups taken on this kind.
Yeah, and there's a lot more data, like this is really just the beginning of the study. So I had a shared Dropbox that I was sharing with some of my colleagues here, and anytime someone would send me an email saying, yes, good, I just put it into the Dropbox, so they're seeing it coming through, and you know, there's so much, because originally I was going to try to deal with all the data here just for this presentation. It became very unwieldy. But when I start looking at the other things and analyzing the data, I want to look at the times where the verb is written together with the pronoun. I want, you know, across everything, not just here, because that's really what we're testing for, right? The min, is it written with the dot as the orthography would tell you, or is it not?
Can I have them? I'll come.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But just because the follow-up.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not problem. In sorting out the data you want, are they all addressed to you?
Yes.
This is how
Yes. All of this is correspondence, one-on-one correspondence. Yeah.
Yeah, but then we want to find out the identity of the respondent. I mean, how close are they to you in social status? For example, if I am addressing, I can use a very informal one because we are almost at the same level. So, by somebody very senior to you, he might find it more difficult to become so informal and use the chant one and go for the more formal variety, this one, and so on.
I actually found, so one, I did take note of, you know, age, status, and the main thing that I mentioned at the outset is that in terms of Midasi, my juniors tended to damase so much more. In terms of seniors, they tended not to use Mikaucho as much, so I got less data from seniors for the Mikaucho. So I was looking at, you know, the degree to which me, myself, could have an impact on what's even coming to me in the first place. But in terms of whether they're chunking or not, again, for both Mikaucho and you saw and the Midasi, by and large, people were chunking across the board, right? And what I attribute, first I want to see are there any patterns. Now once I'm seeing that these are indeed patterns, you know, what could possibly account for the patterns that I'm observing? You know, it's possible that, okay, my junior is doing, but I saw, you know, and I know all of these people personally, right? To different levels, but I know all of them. That's why I'm saying these are L1 speakers. They are so-called native Akans. So we were looking at the Hindi speakers writing English, like, well, they just don't know what's going on. In this case, we would expect that all of these L1 Akan writers would know what's going on, and some of them are even trained linguists. But even amongst the trained linguists, you had some who are doing it this way, some who are doing it that way, some who are chunking everything. So, you know, I think as I delve more into the data, I'll, you know, tease out every detail with it. But again, by and large, everybody was chunking, platform chunking, age chunking. I don't think about mid-da'ase. I don't think about mid-pawo-cho. It's just like that.
Yeah, it seems eventually this work will become a sociolinguistic study.
Yeah,
On the web, okay.
yeah, or perhaps philology.
Next time you come to class, we stand. You talked about lack of knowledge, and I think that is a very important thing. But lack of knowledge of what? Right? Are these people are these trained in reading Akan? Can they read Akan text on their own, or they are only speakers of Akan? For a long time, I was a speaker of Akan, but I didn't know how to read Akan. And so a lot of the things, actually up to my MPhil level, I was even writing them wrongly because I didn't actually know how they were written. I only knew how they sounded. And so if it is the case that the people actually don't even know the authority, all they know is how it sounds, then it's true that they have not morphological knowledge, they have syntactic knowledge, they have phonetic or phonological knowledge, but then they are privileging what they actually are familiar with, which is the phonetics or phonology. All right. In that case, there will be a need for definition of what knowledge they actually know. What do they know?
This is what laid out here in this slide. So, and this is just a sample in terms. Oh, please continue.
The other thing I'll think about the use of the word, especially lexicalization. I don't think when you have this prototypical lexicalization, depending on your definition, I think it's more of constructionalization. It's something that has become a unique construction. So it developed initially as part of this benefactive thing. Probably what we have had now is another taking this dash factive construction, malefactive or benefactive construction, and making it do something else for us. And that is what people grousely calls constructionalization. So we have a new construction, not a new lexical item, which will be what lexicalization will imply. The other things that I wanted to talk about, but
Okay. Yeah, so in terms of what are we talking about when we're talking about knowledge, that's what we're getting at here. And this isn't by any means exhaustive, but we're talking about you have competing perhaps or conflicting harmonizing knowledges. So let's say the person has a particular degree of orthographic knowledge just from seeing it on signboards or whatever, or they've studied formally as a linguist, whatever. But I even found that people who are trained linguists were writing in ways that would be unexpected, to say the least. Phonetic knowledge, right? And I've even, here at the department, sometimes when native writers, speakers, trained linguists are here, when Openia Jikun comes in, they say, you have to just forgive me, Openia. And it's like, just take into account that your orthographic knowledge is much more than mine. I've heard it in several different forms, specifically for Openia Jikun when he's in. You have phonetic knowledge, semantic knowledge, morphological knowledge, syntactic knowledge, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. The person may privilege one over the other due to various circumstances and various contexts. So let's say I have very in-depth phonetic knowledge. I'm a native speaker. That's all I know how to speak, whatever. Well, of course, most of these people know how to do English as well. But they may say, let me privilege this over that for various reasons. They may not even know very much about this, or they may know about it. And this is where we get into resistance or acquiescence. I know what this is, but I'm not going to follow that because that doesn't reflect what's going on phonetically. Right? So we're trying to account for all of these various factors. To what degree is it semantically opaque? To what degree is it transparent? All of these different factors, and then the person is basically ranking, right? For some people, they'll rank orthography. I'm an editor for a G book. So the orthography, what it is what it is, and this outranks everything. In another context, I'm just writing back and forth chatty. I'm privileging phonetics. So the context determines all these different things, just like in divination. So the diviner doesn't ask you, like in Yoruba, for example, they don't ask you what's going on with you. They just give it down, and based on your own context, you get the meaning, right? So these are some of the things that we're talking about. In terms of lexicalization versus constructionalization, we have to look at what point or at any point in time did a new lexeme come into the language, right? Not saying like right now synchronically, anytime I'm looking at it, I'm making a new lexeme, I'm making a new lexeme, I'm making a new lexeme. But we can see that at one point in time, this was a sentence, something verbal, midda, acid, is, sentential at one point in time. You poetry is sentential at one point in time. But at some point in time, this now became, to me, from my understanding, a lexeme in the language. Whether or not we're going to call it a lexeme or a construction. But even as people are writing medasi as one word, what I would get from that is that they're thinking that this is one big thing. It's one big word, one big idiom. And we can look at idioms being thrown into the lexicon wholesale, right? So it's raining cats and dogs. It has its own thing. And I could even say, I can possess that. I can do other things that I can do with whole big chunks, right? And it's because at some point in time, this lexeme, this thing has no longer become a sentence where I can just replace one thing with the other and say, it's raining cats and horses. If it's a sentence, why can't I say that? No, because this is now one big thing that's in my lexicon, I'm pulling out from the lexicon. So I think, just like you said, it would depend on your definition of lexicalization versus constructionalization, but to me, based on my understanding, at some point in time, people realize that this is one big chunk and it's in my lexicon. And even the fact that they're writing it like one big chunk, like it's one big word, it betrays perhaps what's going on with them and what they're thinking about this thing.
For textbook writers, for example, me, that has become like this. Thank you, right? Thank you, right? But we're looking at the origin. It started as these two separate, like where you slave under someone or something, right? But how do I translate it? If I'm doing the glossary, right? That's it. It was the thing.
And this is another point that I really didn't get it. I had to gloss over towards the end. But we also have to factor in the degree to which globalization, exposure to English, and other languages may impact on what we're thinking about. So even where at one point in time, native speakers, let's say 1800, 1700, they would actually perhaps be thinking Midasi. They may actually get down on the ground in the 1300s. But with the coming of English, this is now, they're translating everything back and forth. So now this means, please and excuse me, and sometimes people will even substitute the indigenous tree with the equivalent of English because to them it's just one thing. So these are also other factors that we really didn't get a chance to go into. But the fact that I know English, we have to account for that, right?
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Let's go to the slide titled Prostration and Heart.
Lots of slides. 2 minutes, okay. Yeah. Slide 32. I'll try to put the numbers for you.
I think the last sentence, when the Sultan addresses one of them, he will pick up the garment of his back and throw dust upon his head.
Aren't you happy you don't have to do this anymore?
As long as the he, the pronoun he there, to be interpreted as a logophoric pronoun or a normal personal pronoun. He, what I mean, is the antecedent of he, Sultan, or one of
the antecedent is the person who's doing the prostration. So that person who is doing the prostration takes the garment off his back, so that would be me, in front of the Sultan to show that I'm submissive, I'm putting dust on my head, right? Now, even in terms of some of these terms, this was originally written in Arabic, so we're getting it in translation as well. But here it mentions cap, here it's translated as turban. So again, it's privileging that the word sultan, we know that in the indigenous language of Mali, the ruler was called Mansa. So we have Mansa Musa, Mansa Suleiman, and so forth. So it's even doing these types of translations. So whether or not in Arabic, and I don't have that much knowledge of Arabic, I think that it has both masculine and feminine. So this may only be referring to what males who come into the presence do. Females may do something entirely, different. But again, it would require a further analysis of the source text and a knowledge of Arabic to get at exactly whether it's he and she, generic. But I think Arabic distinguishes between.
I'm not even talking about the he or she.
Just an antecedent.
The he, what is it? The Sultan who takes up one of the addressees.
The addressees.
Or one of the
addressees. Right. Yeah.
So now we have presented.
We have room for one question.
Okay, let me just follow up. Yes. Just one quick second. This issue of benefactive construction and if construction in the tree, I really had a problem with it when I first came to London. There was a small girl selling all of these and I wanted to buy one. She said, no, she rather said tobacco mommy. The mommy there, I interpreted it as a gift construction. So I said, how can I buy it? I will give it right back to you. But later, it was explained that it means what? That I should buy
benefit.
That's a different construction. That's different from the one that we're talking about.
Okay,
Give in the initial
So I'm just talking of the benefactor.
That construction can only mean for my benefit.
Yeah. It can't literally mean
Transfer.
transfer.
But if it's someone else,
Yeah.
Right.
if it is for someone else, that's
If
where
it is the second one.
Okay, since you have a question, right? So it should be the last one.
My question has to do with analysis of the apostrophe mark in some of the data. We keep on saying it's a possessive mark.
Yeah.
But you know in Akan, possessive construction, you have a possessive morpheme for it, a morpheme for it, and also there's a position of these nouns. But then, from a little stage, I know that in Akan, when we have the apostrophe, it indicates deletion of a vowel. Vowel. So I don't know why people are saying that it's
Right. It's because in the orthography, the way it sets up is that you use it as a possessive marker when the object begins with a. And for those who are P teachers, they can let you see it as well. So in all of this data, I'm actually showing you examples from different books, different texts. So originally, there is something being deleted. So if I say nasem, right? You could think that it's coming from ni and then asem. But in the orthography, the time we use apostrophe is when the object begins with the a, right? As opposed to begins with a consonant, begins with anything else. If it begins with another vowel, that vowel would be deleted. So ni, aba, niba, right? So that's the case where that apostrophe will feature. So I think it may just be your understanding of the orthography, but when you look at all these various texts, it's used in that context.
It's not that it's here as made up, right? It's just Southern Africa.
That's how the orthography of Akan works. But again, what we're coming to is how much do we really know about the orthography? Because even on signboards, on advertisements, I see people putting apostrophe all over the place. So based on you seeing that, you may say, oh, anytime something is deleted, I'm going to put an apostrophe. But in the actual text, things that are written along the lines of the Akan orthography, various Akan orthographies, Asante, Ekwapim, so forth, that is the place to use the apostrophe. Right?
We have other commitments, so...
Mr. Alpindizaki, did you have
you have a question?
anything on?
Maybe that can be the last.
As you were talking about the apostrophe, the possession, you have the three pronouns. The first person,
Singular. Only singular too.
and
Yes.
then the second person also has, and then the third person also
Right.
has. So they are the singles. And when you have them, as you were saying, the first letter of the let's begins with A,
Yes.
you delete the preceding.
Only in that context.
That is phonology. Okay. That is phonology. And now that we are using it.
Because it's of time you made our more as in the whole there is a pronoun. And so the deletion there, that means actually means a possessive marker. Actually because of the vowels there.
So I'm saying what your understanding is based on what you're thinking. You're privileging the phonetics over the orthography. The orthography is telling you that this is an object pronoun of the da, and that's how it works. And we can see it more clearly in the Mipao Chow, right? I'm taking off for your benefit, Chow. It's not Wu Chow, right? And there's nothing going on there. But what you are actually giving us an example of right now is I'm privileging the phonetics over what the orthography dictates. So I'm putting the orthography to one side. And so many people are doing this in email exchanges or on billboards. I have all these trotros, the back of trotros. I was going around and I stop at the traffic light and I just put my phone up, take that. And that's all this data. So what you're saying is reflective of what people are doing. And this is why I'm saying that as opposed to it being top down and me, Mr. Linguist, telling everybody this is what to do, that let's make an app, right? And if all Akans are saying, I want to do it your way, anytime a vowel, and this is even transfer, because that's what happens in English. When a vowel is deleted, we put the apostrophe in English. That's not how it works in Akan in terms of apostrophe usage. So now you're even having your English background knowledge. And that's why I'm saying we have to look at the factors of globalization, the fact that you know both, because now you're doing what English does and putting it on Akan when that's not how the Akan works, right?
Okay, let's bring this to us. So thank you for a wonderful presentation. Everyone, thanks for coming.